great to see such a huge turnout here. I'm Glenn Anderson from the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. The Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation and the local Olympia chapter of Veterans for Peace, Rachel Story Chapter 109, are co-sponsoring this very special event. It's exciting to see a full house. It's exciting to broadcast this to the overflow crowd that may be outside on the sidewalk. And it's fun to be in this wonderful historic Capitol Theater with 800 of our closest friends. In planning this event, we had inquiries from all over the region. I wonder if we could get anybody who is from outside of Thurston County and came here today. Would you applaud, please? Yeah! We are so glad that you are here. A couple quick things before we start. If you have a cell phone, please set it so it will not ring. We want the Peace Choir, which will start in just a moment, to be able to entertain us without the competition. We are delighted that Dennis Mills and others are videotaping this, so it will be broadcast on TCTV. It will be later posted to the websites of the two sponsoring organizations, Olympia FOR website and Veterans for Peace Chapter 109 website, and it will be available in some other additional ways. So, we respect everybody's schedule, so we are starting on time at 3 and we will end on time at 5. We want to thank the Artesian Rumble Orchestra who performed outside to make the The Artesian Rumble Orchestra also comes out and performs every Friday late afternoon when the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation has our weekly Friday afternoon Peace Vigil at Percival Landing. I wonder if members of the Artesian Rumble Orchestra could stand up or wave or something so we can recognize them. They may be spread. Oh, there they are. They are one of many entities in this community that make good things happen, rain or shine or all year round. It's great. We also want to mention that Congressman Kucinich's topic, the true cost of war, fits very well with the Bring Our Billions Home campaign of the Western Washington Fellowship of Reconciliation and the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. Military spending is escalating while funding to meet human needs is being slashed, and the federal government is wasting billions on those wars while people are suffering. So we invite people to connect with that Bring Our Billions Home campaign. Your program has two cards we want to mention. One is a 3x5 card that you can write a question on that the ushers will collect at the appropriate time and we'll tell you when. And the other is a card that you might want to provide your contact information about if you want to get on Congressman Kucinich's email list, or if you want somebody from either the Olympia FOR or the local Veterans for Peace chapter to contact you. If you're outside of the area and mark that, we can connect with you and refer you to your nearest local chapter. So, before Congressman Kucinich speaks, we have a great opportunity to hear the Olympia Peace Choir. It's a nonprofit group that began with a vision in the summer of 2010. Their rehearsals and performances are under the direction of Carrie Lynn Nichols, who does an outstanding job. They've been going just for several months, but their membership has grown quickly to 65 members. They are inclusive, diverse, intergenerational. They're all volunteers dedicated to creating peace, justice, and optimism in people's own lives, communities, and nations through the power of song. I'm happy to welcome the Olympia Peace Choir.
We would like you to sing with us when you know the words, and I'm sure you will know some of these words. This next song is going to weave the words meaning peace and greeting. We're first with the Arabic text, then the Hebrew, and then the English text.
mother's eye when their children go out to fight and then they lose their lives. I say, war! What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. War! What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again. War! What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. War ain't nothing but a heartbreaker. War, friend only to the undertaker. War is an enemy to all mankind. The thought of war just blows my mind. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. War has shattered many young persons' dreams. Cleveland was dying alone beside their dream. Oh, I know the war is nothing but an illusion. One day we'll rise above it and stop the confusion. War! What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Peace, love, and understanding. Tell me, is there no place for them today? What do you think? They say that we must fight to keep our freedom. Lord, there's got to be a better way. For the money going to war. What is it good for? Turn the money down. Soul in America's home. Home in the soul. So to keep that money from going to the war. Never done anybody any good that I can see. Never gone crying for it. Bring more dollars home. Bring more dollars home. War. Nothing good about it. Bring a whole soul. Money home to the war. Throw those bills down the hole. Take it home to the people now. What is it good for? We don't need war anymore. No, we don't need the war. So tell us, what's the true cost of war? Oh, tell me the true cost of war. We don't need those wars anymore. We don't need those wars anymore. Bring those babies home now. Bring those bodies home. Bring those bodies home now. Bring those babies home.
When Dennis Kucinich was 23 years old, he was elected to the City Council of Cleveland, Ohio. He was elected mayor of Cleveland when he was about 30-ish. His record was consistently progressive, and he achieved nationwide respect when he protected Cleveland's city-owned electric utility from being privatized, sold to a private corporation. Here's one elected official who really knows how to serve the people, and he has been consistent and vigorous for quite a long number of years. In 1996, he was elected to the United States House of Representatives. He defeated a two-term Republican incumbent. And ever since then, large majorities of voters have consistently re-elected him to Congress. Congressman Dennis Kucinich has consistently been a leader in working for peace and a whole lot of progressive issues. We are absolutely delighted to welcome to Olympia Congressman Dennis Kucinich and his wife Elizabeth Kucinich, and they will be with us in a moment.
Thank you. And thank you. Thank you very much. And to those who are on the sidewalk, thank you, too, for standing by. What a terrific turnout. I'm so grateful to Glenn Anderson, the Fellowship for Reconciliation. And to all those who made this event possible, including the Veterans for Peace, to bring our billions home, which is a great idea. And join me in saluting this tremendous Olympia Peace Choir. Wonderful. When Elizabeth and I were there we're sitting backstage, and I heard you singing, come on people, come together in war, what is it good for? I thought, maybe I don't need to come out here because you've already given my speech. But I think I'll try to justify my presence here by getting into so many of the things that we're concerned about, beginning with the fact that 2 years ago, the Nobel Prize winning economist, Joseph Stiglitz, wrote a book called The $3 Trillion War. How many people here are familiar with that book? He and his associate, Linda Bilmes, did a breakdown of all of the costs that are involved in a war directly through the U.S. budget. They project that right out of the budget, it will be a minimum of $3 trillion. They were really basing their calculations more on the war in Iraq, not so much on Afghanistan. So they had their calculations at $3 trillion. Then they went into the cost of war with respect to what they call the macroeconomic issues. For example, the United States has had to borrow money from China and Japan and other nations in order to finance the war. That amount, according to Dr. Stiglitz, is $2 trillion. In addition to that, they estimate that the cost of oil, if the war had not occurred, that the cost of oil would have risen slowly, but the war, once 2002 came along and there was anticipation of war, supplies started to tighten, and they estimate that the macroeconomic cost of the increased price of oil is $1.6 trillion. They also say that because the government was spending more money on war, there was less money available for both private and public investment to the tune of about $1.2 trillion. Overall, the macroeconomic effects of the war, $5 trillion. That's apart from the $3 trillion that comes right out of the budget. And of course, that $3 trillion, they said, was a very conservative estimate, did not include the long-term cost of the war in Afghanistan, which have accelerated in the past few years. In the federal budget that that was passed, that I did not vote for, there was a appropriation in there for about $100 billion just for the war in Afghanistan alone. We're funding more and more the level of conflict in Afghanistan. the surge that happened in approximately 2007 with the war in Iraq, followed by a surge 2 years later in Afghanistan, has resulted in a tremendous increase in the amount of resources that are dedicated to warfighting. In addition to that, we have the Pentagon, which has claimed a larger and larger share of the budget. They're in what's the part of the budget that's called discretionary spending. Well, the Pentagon right now is over 50% of all discretionary spending. It keeps crowding out all of the other social needs in the country. And of course, this is what the campaign of Bring Our Billions Home is about, because it recognizes, as Dr. Stiglitz did in his book, the fact that when you are spending money in one area, you're not spending it in the other. And what we have done increasingly in America is spend money for war, spend money for an expanded Pentagon machine, which in this budget is approaching $700 billion annually. This doesn't even include some of the weapon systems that are not part of the Pentagon budget. For example, the National Missile Defense, whose aggregate expense is now over $150 billion in development money. This is a system, by the way, that they basically have forged the results to try to continue to justify spending. When I was a relatively new member of Congress, a fellow sat in front of me in a committee meeting, and he had a whole wall full of medals on the left side of his chest, and he was there to promote the National Missile Defense and to show me a video, and the members of the committee a video. And there was a video that was just amazing because it showed a missile being launched from one place, and then 6,000 miles away, another missile being launched, and there up in the heavens, they collided. And members of the committee were really impressed until I asked the question, were those missiles programmed to hit each other? You know, like an electronic hit me sign, right? And, General, oh, yes, okay, I got it. Other than fixing and rigging the test results, this system doesn't work, okay? So, I pointed this out, and last week in debate on the floor of the House of Representatives, what I suggested was this, that they ought to use a measure in approving this missile system, that the missile system ought to have to go by the same standards as children do in No Child Left Behind, and that is if the kids can't pass the test, the school doesn't get the funding, right? Well, if they can't pass the test, the program shouldn't get funded. Not that we'd want it anyway. But I mention this because what's happening is that more and more the social needs of our country are getting rejected. In the budget that just passed, there is a cut in funds for higher education. Now, I just met a number of students from Washington State who are justly concerned about a state budget which is impacting higher education quite adversely here in Washington State. But when you think about it, the priorities that Washington is setting are forcing states to do less with less and are causing a shift in the inflection of what government should be about anyway. This whole idea that about government of the people is really getting trashed. At the beginning of this Congress, we read from the Constitution of the United States, which was a nice recitation. But the fact of the matter is, if we're really looking at being a government of the people, then things like employment, creating jobs, education for all, health care for all, retirement security, and peace ought to be fundamental to what a government should be. Unfortunately, and so we can actually quantify the cost of war to understand the real loss to our society when a country determines that it is going to not only initiate a war, but continue to be at war. Now, no one argues about whether or not our country has a right to defend itself. I think all of us here can come to an agreement that if the country is under attack from without, we understand there's an obligation to defend ourselves. But that's not what this is about anymore. The United States spends more on defense than the next 14 countries combined. And at some point, the money is so extreme for the Pentagon that we spend more than all the rest of the world put together for building up this military machine. And it's no mistake that the more that we shift things in that direction, the less we meet the needs of the people, the real needs of people, the practical aspirations of people for jobs, for health care, for education, for retirement security, for peace. And as we move away from meeting the aspirations of the people, we move away from what a democracy ought to be. And so at this moment in the history of our country, we are moving in a profoundly anti-democratic position, with more and more money for the Pentagon, more and more money for war, and money for bases in dozens of countries around the world. Why should we spend $35 billion a year, or something in that order, to continue to house bases around the world? Why should we be doing that? Why aren't we using the resources of this country to be able to take care of our needs at home? So, but when we talk about the true cost of war, I'm not talking, and let us not talk only about the money, because that we can spend a lot of time, and that's what they do in hearings, where they spend a lot of time going into the quantitative dimensions of what a war costs. I want to talk about something else here, though. I want to talk about what a war does to the soul of a nation. What a war does to disconnect us from each other. What a war does that disconnects us from all of humanity. What a war does that causes us to be separated from the deeper truths about what it means to be human. Right. Let's talk about that. We have a right to expect our government tells us the truth. Unfortunately, our government has not been telling us the truth, and the government lied to take us into war against Iraq. That's for certain. Now, I was in the Congress at the time that the debate was taking place, and I led 126 members of the House of Representatives. I led 126 members of the House of Representatives in challenging the basis for the war against Iraq. And what we, well, let me, thank you, but let me explore with you some of the, let's go back now to 2002, October, when the Bush administration presented Congress with a resolution, and that resolution asked for war against Iraq, and it stated many different causes. And when you start to look at what we were told then, and what the whole country bought into, and you look at where we are now, we need to review this recitation before we ask, where do we go from here? So, number one, Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. And yet, Vice President Cheney beat the drum very loudly and everywhere he went to tell the American people that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And he, of course, was joined by the President and other members of the President's administration. They took the fear that descended upon this country after 9/11, the fear which is a real thing, which is palpable, and they marshaled that fear in the service of a war against the people who had no intention, no capability, no desire to not only to attack the United States, but who had done everything they could to try to create conditions which would cause the United States to back off. The International Atomic Energy Agency, led by Mohammed El-Baradei, who of course has been very active in events in Egypt. The International Atomic Energy Agency said they couldn't find that Iraq had done any real work towards developing a weapons program. The inspectors who were part of that said that 95% of anything that Iraq had was destroyed during the Gulf War. And that the other 5% that they felt they couldn't account for, they felt that that was probably destroyed as well. And that there was no evidence anywhere that there was a weapons program, that they had the ability to create one. And what we saw, though, was this attempt to alter the intelligence. We learned last week this character called Curveball admitted that he lied. Well, big surprise. I mean, who believed him? Think about it. You have an intelligence asset, quote unquote, and his name is Curveball? I mean, what made me think is that somebody in the CIA gave him that nickname so that anyone with an ounce of sense would not believe a thing the guy had to say. Curveball, right? But his testimony was taken not only as gospel, but became the basis for Colin Powell's presentation before the United Nations. When you look, the poet who said, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave, when first we practiced to deceive." There was a practice to deceive the nation. And this practice was quite elaborate. It involved the vice president going over to the CIA to try to intimidate people, to shape the intelligence to the policy that the administration was undertaking. It involved forging documents to try to get people to believe that there was uranium in Niger that was going to be sent to Iraq for the purposes of developing a nuclear weapon. This was all, the whole tissue of it was lies. Now, we not only spent, or will spend, at least $3 trillion for Iraq, with $5 trillion minimum on what the macroeconomic effects. But according to the Lancet report, which 3 years ago did a study of the increased death rate in Iraq, 3 years ago, that death rate was projected to be over 670,000 excess deaths during the period of the war. Stieglitz takes that in his book and projects it to the number right now would be in excess of 1 million. He then monetizes it. He says that the cost to the Iraqi people of the loss of lives, the value of a life, so if you were to monetize that, it would be $8.7 trillion. The destruction of Iraq at every level, of their society, of their infrastructure, of families. This is horrific. And it's on a scale that is so heartbreaking. And it was done in our name. Now, if there is any justice in the world, if there's ever been any justice in the world, each and every high-ranking person in the Bush administration must be brought to justice for the lies that they told the American people and the world to take us into war. There must be accountability. America will never escape the stain of this war until Mr. Bush, Mr. Cheney, and company are brought to justice. The Christian Bible says you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. We will never be free until the American people know the truth about how they were lied to take us into this war. And we were lied to. And the lies were deliberate. It wasn't like somebody made a mistake. There was a deliberate effort to take us into war. And we cannot be taken for fools. We have to insist that there be justice. Now let's talk about accountability. Congress has failed to hold the Bush administration accountable. It's sad to say, but the present administration has failed to hold the Bush administration accountable for the lies. And all of the international agreements that are out there, the United States has, of course, not participated in some of the agreements which would imply that we cannot or would not hand over any of our officials for any war crimes proceedings. But the fact of the matter is that any other state that's a party to agreements that have to do with war crimes has the ability to prosecute. Now here's the question: why should we as Americans have to ask Spain or some other country to do the work that we have to do in order to take this blot off of our name as a country? You know, why should we have to expect some other country steps in to describe what the level of justice ought to be in the United States for officials who have made decisions that have had such a catastrophic effect? It's time that we reclaim who we are, the best that we are, that we stand for what's right, that we stand for justice. And so we move from truth to accountability. And if we are able to make that journey, then the next step will be reconciliation. Now, Glenn, your work with the Fellowship of Reconciliation is so important because it speaks to the injunction that we are taught to make peace with our brothers and sisters. This is a very important part of all of our lives because we've all been in situations where we've offended someone or someone has offended us. And we all recognize that the power to reconcile, that power that's involved in the very human trait of forgiveness, has transformative potential. It has the potential to change the world. That our ability to be able to make peace with ourselves and with other nations is the ability to be able to once again have America be a moral leader in the world. This concept of reconciliation is something that can only come about through accountability. Now, Great Britain took the step of having a commission in which they called people forward to have to testify. Mr. Blair had to come before this commission. We need such a commission in the United States because South Africa had a commission on peace and reconciliation that enabled it to get beyond apartheid. And if America has such a commission, it would enable us to get beyond the conditions which have resulted in us going to war against innocent people. We need to make sure that our ability to reconcile stems from the truth and stems from a desire for accountability, but also for closure. Because there is no closure. As long as the truth's not told, there's no accountability and there's no reconciliation. We're just left hanging. Look at how our country's been left hanging in the wake of 9/11. 9/11 was appropriated for the purposes of war, of separation. We talk about how war is so costly. We separated ourselves from the world at a time when the world was pouring out its heart to America. People were ready to, people identified with us in our suffering. And they were ready to console us. But instead of accepting that hand of consolation, our leaders chose a path of vengeance. And today, we are seeing, again, the wisdom of that biblical injunction about vengeance is mine. Said the Lord, I will repay. Our leaders took it upon ourselves for vengeance, and we have reaped a whirlwind of vengeance against ourselves. This is a teaching that we have to explore, because we have to go back through that experience of 9/11. We've got to go back through the experience of fear, which we all felt.
9/11 is a lie!
Well, it's a date we have to keep in mind. And in keeping it in mind, what I would suggest is this. One of the things we need to do to heal this country from the wars that ensued is to try to remember, with all of its flaws, what America was like before 9/11, because 9/11 represented the opportunity for those who wanted an American imperium to seize that moment and intensify America's military posture around the world with this phony global war on terror. We have to go back through that philosophical, political rabbit hole and come out to the place where we stood before 9/11 to realize the potential of this nation to exist without a global war on terror, the potential for this nation to exist without a big military buildup, the potential for this nation to exist without endless war. This, because it's endless war that threatens the essence of our democracy. And so, truth, accountability, reconciliation, and then reclaiming our basic democratic ideals. Right after 9/11, the administration moved to push through the so-called Patriot Act. Thank you. You know, I didn't take an Evelyn Wood speed reading course, but what happened was that they brought a new bill out about 1,100 pages, and I ran to the clerk's desk and started to page through it. And I tell people I voted against it because I read it, okay? And I read it, and what I saw was a really drastic revision of basic civil liberties, of a First Amendment right to freedom of association, freedom of speech, a Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, giving the FBI the ability to issue so-called national security letters, which are private requests, like with the power of a subpoena, without any judicial review. They can ask for financial records and health records and any other kind of records they want from anybody for any reason whatsoever. 9/11 and the wars helped to intensify a national security state where our basic civil liberties have been undermined and where we come to accept as normal the fact that the FBI can be involved in spying on peace activists, where it's normal that the FBI can start to tap somebody on the shoulder and say, we want all these records without any judicial review. The Constitution was written in a way as to stop the power of government from being able to reach deeply into individuals' lives and basically destroy those lives using the justice system. But you know what? We've lost that as long as this Patriot Act stays alive. And so, good news, Congress, a few more people in this Congress have voted to repeal the Patriot Act. But we have to we have to come to a condition where we insist on our basic civil liberties, where we insist on a return to where we don't have to worry if government's tapping our phones and listening into our conversations or following our moves simply because we disagree with what the government does. This is a moment where we have to now describe what kind of a country we want. And that's what we have a right to do. We come together here understanding what we don't want. We know that we don't want endless war. We know that we don't want to be lied to. We know that we don't want an acceleration of this war in Afghanistan. We know that we want to bring our troops home from Iraq and Afghanistan. We know we don't want America running all around the world seeking dragons to slay. We know we ought to focus our country to take care of things here at home. That we want jobs for all. And we want health care for all. And we want education for all. And we want retirement security for all. And we want peace. And when do we want it? When do we want it? When do we want it? Just this last week, so you can understand the nature of our challenge, just this last week, Congress voted more money for the war, more money for the Pentagon, and cut $42 million, the entire budget for the United States Institute of Peace. I can't make this stuff up. What I'm saying is that this war mentality has so infected our country that those who are making the decisions, many of them very good people, don't know how to think in any other terms. So, what I think we need to do, and one of the things that many of you have been supportive of, 2 months before 9/11, I introduced legislation with the support of dozens of members of Congress to create a cabinet-level Department of Peace. Now, when I did this, I had, some people were looking at me sideways saying, yeah, Dennis, right. We need another bureaucracy. And I said, well, let's fund it 1% of what we give the Pentagon. Yeah, right. But here's this journey that we're on. Why should we accept the level of violence that's in our society? Why do we believe that war is inevitable? Why do we believe that violence is inevitable? Why does anyone in our government believe that if we don't? The question we have to put to ourselves is this. What if we changed something in our society, this impulse towards violence, by creating a mechanism where we could educate our children to look at the other person as an aspect of oneself, to peace giving, peace sharing, mutuality, to teach children not to hit another child, to teach children about what words mean, because words are powerful. If you say something against another person, how that can hurt. To teach children about that. We can teach nonviolence. We can teach it. And when you think about it, when you look at the challenge of violence in our society, and we've all run into it one way or another, at one time or another in our lives, let's look at it. Domestic violence, spousal abuse, child abuse, violence in schools, gang violence, gun violence, racial violence, violence against gays. Police community challenges, we understand that. But when you look at it, we cannot accept, we should not accept that society is always going to be that way. That we have the ability to change it. Now, those who study evolution, the track of biological evolution, you watch the growth of the trajectory of a species, how it'll just move over a period of thousands of years, but then there's a break. And in what is called by physicists punctuated equilibrium, there's a fast and rapid growth of a species. This is in the biological phenomenon of evolution. I want to apply that for a moment to social evolution, to our ability as a society and as individuals to to be more than we are and better than we are. That we have a capacity to transform ourselves. It's not about any one person doing this, although the progression of any one person can help to affect the progression of all of us. But if we start to focus on our capacity to live peacefully, to express ourselves peacefully, to evolve, we actually can become the ones we're waiting for. This is our challenge in our time. And I know that you're all dedicated to that. But this is our moment, really. It's not about waiting for our government to change apart from us. We have to evolve, and we're called upon and challenged, really, to evolve so quickly, to grow into that space of peace, of tranquility, of reconciliation, of forgiveness, of accountability and truth, to grow into that space so that we help to affect a social and political transformation in this country. I think we have that kind of capability. I know you do. And I love you for being here to participate in this, and I thank you. Thank you very much.